Hey everyone, Leo is here with my good friend Arnov. We're here to talk about Arc-enabled servers security. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, Leo is here. Another Jumpstart Lightning episode. I have a returning guest. Arnov, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. This is like your fourth, fifth, sixth time. I don't know.
Yeah, we've lost track of times at this point.
Arnov, for those of you who don't know who you are, what is it that you do?
Yep, I'm Arnov, a product manager on the Azure Arc platform, focused on Azure Arc-enabled servers, and excited to chat today about the latest and greatest from a security perspective with Azure Arc.
It's been a while since we did an episode specifically about Arc-enabled servers, and this is part of a new series that we're coming up with around security, specifically for Azure Arc. So we're going to have more episodes coming in the next few days and weeks. Arnav, today we're here to talk about Arc-enabled servers and security. I know there's been a lot of work going on in this space, so I think let's just get started. Like, what are we here to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really want to focus on security best practices across the end-to-end customer experience with Azure Arc. So we want to start off from an onboarding perspective, how you can have security best practices there. From an extension perspective, as you use the different management services, the identity and authorization, all the way through configuration and networking. So we're really
Mhm.
looking to make sure that every part of the connected machine agent, the Arc agent, you understand what are some of the best security practices and precautions that you can take, especially as you're thinking about deploying at scale.
And for the Jumpstart viewers, so those of you who will look for more information, Arnav, the team did a great job on creating like a very comprehensive security white paper, which we're going to link in the description down below. So, Arnav, let's talk about the components that we need to think about, or the process that we need to think about in the context of Arc-enabled servers and security.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, every single Azure Arc enabled server is powered with what we call the Azure Arc Connected Machine Agent. And the Connected Machine Agent has three core components. It has the hybrid instance metadata service. So think of this as establishing the identity, the authentication. It has machine configuration, and it has the extension manager, which enables different VM extensions and services. But as you can think, every single subcomponent has some security components as well and security best practices involved with it. And so that's really what we're going to be double clicking on today. We'll be looking at the identity perspective, the machine configuration perspective, and the extension services, and how you can best secure that for your organizational needs.
And one of the most popular questions, at least that I'm seeing in the context of Arc-enabled servers, besides the fact that there is the extensions, Defender, which we're going to show in the demo later on, but it's the agent, right? It's that initial component that needs to be enabled in order for all this magic to happen. It's the Arc connected machine agent. So I think that's the first thing that we're going to tackle here, right? The onboarding process.
Yep, absolutely. So he'll flip ahead and really focusing in on onboarding best practices. And so, as you're aware, onboarding requires a credential. And we have what's called a service principle for Azure Arc onboarding. The onboarding principle, service principle for Azure Arc, this is something you can actually limit. You can limit that both in role and in lifetime. So you can assign to the service principle for onboarding your servers to Azure Arc at scale, just the Azure Connected Machine onboarding rule. And so this will only allow you to onboard servers to Azure Arc, not perform any additional actions. Additionally, you can restrict the lifetime for a service principal. So it can be 1 day, a week, 30 days, depending on your organizational needs. So, really restricting the credential access with the service principal as well as the lifetime is a critical practice. The other piece is protecting the service secrets actually being used in the onboarding script using encryption. So, when it comes to options like group policy, SCCM, Ansible, we actually document how you can encrypt those service principal associated secrets for authentication as well. The other piece with this is as you're deploying the agent, you already want to think about proactively making sure you're keeping the agent up to date. You want to have a plan in place for configuring agent updates in the future because we often have security fixes as well. And the final piece we want to highlight is the Azure Arc enabled server it inherits certain properties depending on where it sits in Azure, where it lands. And they're really valuable landing zone resources architectures you can use. But it's important you think about deploying to the right subscription, resource group, and region, and that architecture, especially if that fits into how you're thinking about RBAC identity and even separating out different rules and restrictions as well. So those are some of the core things you want to be thinking about from an onboarding perspective and making sure you're being really granular and secure from day zero.
Loving it.
Awesome. So probably what's next is the services, right? Why are you onboarding to Azure Arc? You want to deploy management services like Azure Monitor, like Microsoft Defender, which we're going to be showing, Azure Update Manager. There's an entire laundry list of management services that are available with Azure Arc. But at the same time, you're probably thinking, well, that's access to a buffet of capabilities, but maybe we don't want access to all of those things. And so what we have is what we call local agent security controls. And so as a customer, what you're able to do is you're actually able to specify allow lists and block lists of specific extensions. We also have agent modes like monitor mode, where you're able to have a pre-configured set of allowed extensions for specific scenarios. The other piece is you can even disable the entirety of the extension manager if you're not interested in using any VM extensions or services with Azure Arc. So between the local agent security controls, agent modes, the ability to disable the extension manager, there's a lot of control you have in terms of turning on or turning off specific extensions, allowing or blocking those. The
Yeah.
other interesting thing to note here is the auto extension upgrade. So extensions also have updates with security fixes, and with the auto extension upgrade capability, you're able to make sure you're staying on the latest extension version.
The this notion of separation of concerns, because this is what you're describing here, that
Mhm.
separation of concerns is something that, for years, as we were rolling out Arc enabled servers and the product got matured and, we added more features, separations of concerns at that level was something that was extremely critical. And if you think about an example for this type of implementation, specifically with you being able to have, an allow or block list for this type of extension. Think about the custom script extension. That's a great example, right? Because custom script extension is a very powerful extension. It allows you, to just apply scripts, via a custom script extension on the Arc enabled servers. But at that point, it's like, you're shooting the script and that's it. Like you don't have any way to know what the script functionality is from the context of Arc enabled servers. So by being able to either block or allow, for that matter, this extension, you're increasing the security posture because not everyone or not every server, Arc enabled server resource should have access to this type of extensions. Just as an example, right? I can think of many of other examples, but this one really kind of highlight that separation of concern and that specific functionality.
Yeah, absolutely, Leor. I think the custom script extension, and while it's a really powerful capability, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because you don't
Yeah,
necessarily want to have that enabled or allowed across all of your contexts. Think, for example, you have a lockdown scenario with a domain controller. You don't want to allow custom script extension there. And so
100%.
this local agent security control can be really powerful, and it's a very flexible tool as well.
100%. Okay.
Absolutely. And the next piece I want to talk a little bit about is actually the identity piece, which is the system assigned identity associated with every Arc enabled server. So the hybrid instance metadata service, HIMDS, what this does is it effectively sends heartbeats. We authenticate the validity of our Arc enabled server. And every Arc enabled server by default has a system assigned Microsoft Entra ID. It's a managed identity for the authorization process. And locally on the server, we actually have a cert. It's valid for up to 90 days, stored on the local disk, which we recommend is protected as well. And that's what's being used for the identity for the protection piece. So it's important to think about that as well. And thinking about limiting the RBAC rules for the control and access to the Arc enabled server. So with that system managed identity, you can also specifically enable Entra roles for an Arc enabled server, like an administrator role, etc., within a specific resource group, subscription, or even a specific Azure Arc enabled server. You can even create custom Entra roles. For example, if you just want someone to be able to view monitoring logs and run specific extension updates for an Arc server resource. So the identity piece is also critical here, and it's important to just note the system managed identity getting created, the local cert, and the fact that you have this native Entra integration there.
Yeah, it's such an important piece to talk about, this granular control. I mean, we touched on that in the previous section, right, when we talked about the separation of concern. But that granular control that you have over, this process, like the fact that, the metadata service and all of that, I think that, like, and this is something that our viewers needs to realize, that in the past, like, that level of granularity was not there. And I think that if you think about Arc-enabled servers from a very high level point of view, right? What's the point? The point is to get the server into the control plane, to Azure, in order for you to get benefits out of the cloud ecosystem that is coming, like the Azure ecosystem, right? Extensions and so forth. But here's the thing, right? This, if you have that granular control on premises with your local servers without Arc enabling them, that's okay. What we want to make sure is that because you onboarded the server, we don't, poke holes in your security posture, which is why we offer that level of granularity. So that's something very important, for the viewers to realize here.
Absolutely. And the next component of granular control we want to talk about is the guest configuration or machine configuration component. So machine configuration can actually be used for hardening your security posture as well. So machine configuration, think of this as enabling sort of the governance engine. You can enable application OS settings, both auditing and remediation for your Arc-enabled server. And a really popular scenario with this is actually enabling Windows and Linux security baselines and auditing through machine configuration. So that can be very useful. At the same time, there might be machine configuration and connectivity components that you want to disable. So just like we talked about disabling extensions and services, you can disable the guest configuration or machine configuration service, as well as the connectivity platform enables. So that includes capabilities like SSH Arc, Windows Admin Center, and run command as well for some of these remote access scenarios. So it's
Yeah.
both the machine configuration can enable through these security baselines security posture hardening in specific cases. And there's also the granularity. If you want to disable machine configuration or some of the connectivity components, you're able to do that as well. Great. With that, the last piece we wanted to touch on is the idea of Azure Arc networking, right? That connected machine agent, it's not just sitting there locally, it's creating an outbound connection to Azure, to the Azure control plane. And that's where you're actually leveraging the Azure management services for creating this projection in R. And so what's important to note is all of the connections are TCP over 443. We have HTTPS connections using SSL and TLS. It's all officially signed and verified certs. And all of the connections are outbound unless specified. Another important thing to note is we don't just support public endpoint connectivity. We support proxy connectivity and we support private endpoint as well. So a lot of our customers are using site-to-site VPN or ExpressRoute to keep all of the traffic within the Azure backbone. And finally, a key piece from a networking perspective is we're thinking about how we can also limit some of the endpoints you're having to whitelist. So there's the Azure Arc Gateway in public preview, and that's helping simplify a lot of the networking endpoints that you might need to whitelist as well. So we're really
Yeah,
thinking about different network connectivity options, restricting that, and also restricting the number of endpoints you're having to whitelist to make sure that you have a secure networking protocol from
yeah.
the Azure control plane to your local Arc agent on your server.
For sure, one of the as you know, Arnov, Arc Azure Arc Gateway has been one of those most requested platforms and solutions. As we were, developing this, we actually had an previous episode of Lightning for this. We're gonna link this. Uh, the like this is something that we keep hearing about, like that connectivity to Azure. That's the thing that I would argue. I don't know if you would agree with me. It's the thing that that Microsoft customers are most concerned about when it comes to that, that path, right? Because, you know, and I agree with you, like site-to-site VPN, express route, but I think that we keep working on making sure that that connectivity is always secured. So very important piece of the architecture.
Yep. Absolutely. Networking security is a really critical piece that we're continuously trying to improve. And this is a journey. Since we started, we've continued to try to reduce the number of endpoints you need to whitelist, reduce the number of wildcards, for example, improve the documentation for all of
Yeah.
the connectivity options we have. And we really envision moving to connectivity being less and less of a friction point for our customers, obviously, a key point from a networking security perspective as well. But this was a wrap in terms of some of the core security best practices across the
Mhm.
Azure Arc Connected Machine Agent I wanted to showcase. And I wanted to flip the switch a little bit and talk about how Arc can actually help improve your security posture. And I thought the best way to do that would actually be to pull up and show Azure Arc with Microsoft Defender for Cloud.
Let's go.
Great. So here we are in Azure Portal in the Microsoft Defender for Cloud overview. And so when you're here, you might be thinking, these are all Azure native resources. But in fact, through Azure Arc, we're actually able to connect non-Azure resources just as natively. You also can connect your multi-cloud resources using the Azure Arc multi-cloud connector across AWS, GCP as well. And so here we have tens of thousands of assessed resources across our security posture, our regulatory compliance. You have visibility into workload protection, and an inventory of all of your assets, as well as visibility into emerging vulnerabilities as well. Now, Defender for Cloud, that would probably take a whole hour, not just the amount of time we have for nuts and bolts video. But what I wanted to double click on was actually what does this look like from an inventory perspective? And so I'm going to be opening up, and we have tens of thousands of resources here. We have some Azure VMs here, but we also have some Azure Arc enabled servers. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a handful of Azure Arc enabled servers here in our inventory view. And what I really want to highlight here with this view is how similar the Azure Arc enabled server machine is to an Azure native resource. So here you can see Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, SQL Server, SCVMM. And what's important to note here is Azure Arc across its ecosystem is supported with Defender for Cloud. It's one of the most popular use cases for Azure Arc from a security perspective. And so here we're going to be double clicking on just some of the Azure Arc resources. And so here you see Tailwind SQL. So this is Azure Arc enabled Windows Server hosting SQL Server instance. And what you can see here is actually a whole list of recommendations for your Azure Arc enabled servers. You can see that Defender has been enabled, monitoring has been enabled. You can get granularity if there are any installed applications. You can get any alerts if available. But what's really neat here is these recommendations. You can actually double click on a recommendation and then you can get point and fix remediation. So, for example, here, if you want to audit the minimum password length with our resource health view, we actually have point and click, take action. So we have a workflow automation we can enable. We have a graph where we have visibility into querying this as well. And so this really typifies the power of Azure Arc, where just like with your Azure native resources, you have these actions you can take, this granular resource help, this visibility into their status. You can also point and click just as easily into an Azure Arc enabled resource. And this could be a resource that's sitting on prem in another public cloud elsewhere, and you get the same ability to point and click and fix different remediations, get alerting from one place, and use some of the AI capabilities built in from a security copilot perspective as well. And so we talked a lot today about how you can enable all of these different best practices to make sure your Azure Arc enabled server deployment is secure. But what's also important to note is Azure Arc is actually a bridge to using some of Microsoft's robust security capabilities across Defender for Cloud and Microsoft Sentinel, just for example.
Yeah. It's definitely very very cool to see the journey that we've been up to in the past few years with Azure Arc and specifically with servers. And it really resonated with me, that last statement, right? I mean, we always said that Azure Arc enabled servers, like, it's really your way to benefit out of the the breadth of Azure in an environment that before Azure Arc did not have the ability to have such a strong security posture in the case of Defender. And obviously the list of extensions and capability goes on and on. And we just saw a glimpse of that. Arnav, thank you so much for joining me. Obviously, we're going to link the, like I mentioned, we have a very powerful white paper around security posture and best practices for Arc-enabled servers. I'm going to link this in the description down below. So Arnav, thank you so much for joining me today, and for the Jumpstart viewers, for the Jumpstart Lightning viewers, thank you so much for joining us. We're coming up with more episodes in this series. Stay tuned. We're going to see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.